This video is brought to you by Surfshark. Secure your digital life and gain private access to the open internet.
Vows, oaths, pledges, commitments. Throughout our lives, we all make them. And whether it's the vows to a partner that this bride made on her wedding day, or that which we may make to a business or even a country, these commitments help us understand how we're supposed to behave. And when there is doubt, they provide a framework for us to fall back on. As a conservator, I too take an oath. Actually, 13 of them.
And as we follow along the conservation of this beautiful Slovakian bride, we'll take a closer look at those oaths I've made to this painting. My vows. You know, people aren't the only ones who can make vows, and though it sounds silly, it's anything but. Surfshark knows that, and they're different from other VPNs because they've made a vow to protect you. Take your credit card, for instance. We all shop online, and our credit card numbers end up in places where they shouldn't. Well, Surfshark will monitor to see if your credit card has been exposed, and then tell you what type of data was compromised so that you can protect yourself. And Surfshark is pretty great because one subscription allows you to install it on an unlimited number of devices, and they have an app for just about everything: PC, Mac, Linux, Android, iOS, smart TVs, Amazon Fire Stick, Apple TV, Chrome, Firefox, Xbox, and PlayStation. So check out surfshark.deals/restoration and enter the promo code RESTORATION for, get this, 83% off and an extra 3 months for free. I mean, you're basically stealing it from them. The way that this and every project begins is with a thorough examination and documentation. It doesn't take much looking at this painting to realize that it is in very poor condition. There is flaking paint, well, pretty much everywhere. The painting has also been lined, which tells me that this was an attempt to correct the flaking, but clearly it didn't solve the problem. The flaking could have been a result of water damage or moisture exposure or other mistreatment or mishandling. I don't know exactly. That information wasn't provided to me. Suffice it to say, it's here and we have to do something about it. In addition, whenever there is this much flaking and the painting has been conserved in the past, we have to assume that there is a lot of retouching. And some of it we can see clearly with our naked eye. The color has changed over time. But with a UV examination, we get a better idea of just how extensive the retouching was. All of those dark spots are retouching, and some more that are a little harder to see. Some of this may be necessary, some of it may not be. Some of it may be good, and some of it may be, well, excessive. But I'm going to document everything that I find here, and make a permanent record of it. In addition, when I begin testing the painting to discover what kind of varnish and surface grime and retouching medium was used, I'll document that as well. I'm going to make a series of tests to determine just what solvent mixtures and solutions I'll need to conserve this painting, and I'll keep those notes for when I do the work. In addition, I'll make photographic documentation of the test squares to send to my client before work so that they can get an idea of just what the painting will look like. And as I make one of those test windows, well, we can see that though this painting isn't profoundly dirty, just removing a slightly yellowed varnish reveals a range of colors that, well, they're worth seeing. And all of this first phase of the conservation brings us to Article 7 of the Code of Ethics. The conservation professional shall document examination, scientific investigation, and treatment by creating permanent records and reports. And so I'll create a proposal which has all of the information that I've gathered and submit that to my client. Now, once the proposal is approved, I can begin with the actual work, and for this painting, it all begins with the stabilization of the paint surface itself, which, as you saw, was in a perilous state. I'm heating up some fish gelatin, and I'm going to face the painting with washi kozo. And this brings me to Article 2 of the Code of Ethics. All actions of the conservation professional must be governed with an informed respect for the cultural property, its unique character and significance, and the people or persons who created it. Simply put, everything I do needs to be in accord with the importance of this piece and whomever created it. Basically, I need to do everything in my power to make sure that this piece is treated respectfully. And I'm using small squares of washi kozo here because the paint surface is really textured. You can see areas are actively lifting up. And the small squares allow me to embed the paper in and around the surface. So it really conforms to that irregular surface and will make sure there's a good bond and that all of that paint is held in place. And while the fish gelatin is drying, let's talk about Article number 4. The conservation professional shall practice within the limits of personal competence and education, as well as within the limits of the available facilities. In short, don't get out in front of your skis. In my initial discussions with my client, they expressed some reservations about removing the lining, as it would add significant cost to the project, and I had to inform them that according to Article 3, while recognizing the right of society to make appropriate and respectful use of cultural property, the conservation professional shall serve as an advocate for the preservation of cultural property, required me to encourage them to do everything possible to preserve this painting, including removing the lining. Now, when it comes to the lining canvas, I have a lot to say, and I'm going to hit a lot of points pretty quickly. Initially, I had made some tests and discovered that the lining canvas was saturated with rabbit skin glue, leading me to believe that that was the adhesive used. Well, of course, it's not. It's contact cement. And despite all of my efforts, there is no way that I'm going to be able to separate this lining canvas from the painting mechanically. So I have to do it chemically. And this brings me to Article 12. The conservation professional shall practice in a manner that minimizes personal risks and hazards to co-workers, the public, and the environment. Hence the crazy respirator. You see, I have to use a highly toxic solvent to break down the contact cement. So my doors are locked, my HVAC system is on and running full blast, I am well protected, and now I can begin. Now, it should come as no surprise that the use of contact cement is bad, verboten, almost criminal, and it goes directly against Article number 6. The conservation professional must strive to select methods and materials that, to the best of current knowledge, do not adversely affect cultural property or its future examination, scientific investigation, treatment, or function. In no universe, on no planet, is contact cement an appropriate material for use on paintings. It never has been, and it never will be. And so the use of it here is just incredibly problematic. And it tells me that whoever worked on this painting simply wasn't aware of any code of ethics or didn't care. Now, it would seem logical that at this point in the process, I would have stopped and contacted my client and had a hard and frank discussion about my ability, interest, or really desire to continue doing this, given the exposure to toxic materials and how difficult removing this contact cement is. But at no point during that conversation did I ever consider not doing it. You see, even though this is miserable and incredibly time-consuming and effectively saps any profit from this project, Article 5 informs me that while circumstances may limit the resources allocated to a particular situation, the quality of work that the conservation professional performs shall not be compromised. And for me not to do this, to remove this contact cement, at least in my mind, would be a big compromise in the quality of my work. I would be knowingly leaving a material on a painting that was harmful and inappropriate. And for that, I'd be culpable. Now, the process of removing this contact cement requires that I saturate a piece of felt with that solvent, and then I press it while it's under a piece of PET film so that the highly evaporative solvent has enough time to work. If done correctly, and this takes about 15 minutes, well, the contact cement softens up, and then I can scrape it off with a scalpel. But literally, the minute I take off the PET film and the felt, the contact cement starts hardening up and rebonding to the canvas, so I have to act quickly. The process of removing all of this contact cement in 2 by 3 inch squares took the entire day. That's right, 8 hours working on one painting. But it was necessary and worth it, because now the canvas is free of contact cement, and I can proceed with a normal course of action. And now onto the hot table, where I'm going to treat the painting to remove the planar distortions, the bumps, the waves, and the ripples in the canvas. But I'm also going to use the application of heat, moisture, and pressure to soften the size and the canvas, and hopefully bring the flaking paint down and rebond it to the original canvas with the canvas's original size. So once the painting is up to temperature, I'll turn the vacuum pump on, extract the air, and then let the pressure do its thing. Now I'm going to use a veneer roller, a bone folder, and eventually a piece of balsa wood where there's more impasto, because the balsa wood will deform rather than gouging the paint layer. And these are all just tools to help press down the paint layer. Now once the hot table treatment is done, I can prepare the canvas for a lining. And it needs it because there are areas where the canvas is threadbare. That tan yellow area is the actual ground layer the canvas is missing. And I'm applying a fill-in medium here because the thickness of the canvas, while not very thick, is enough to create a divot. That is, when I put the painting on the hot table and flip it face up and apply pressure, well, there will be a little void where the canvas is missing, and the vacuum pump and pressure downward on the paint layer will force the paint layer into that little void, and we'll have a divot manifest on the front of the painting, something that we don't want. So simply filling in the gap with this medium allows the painting to have a smooth and flush surface on the back, which will manifest a smooth and flush surface on the front, which is what we want. Now here's another example of Article 12, the one about health and safety in action. I created this collapsible spray room so that I could use varnishes, adhesives in a contained area and exhaust the fumes out of the studio to protect not only myself, but anybody else who happens to be in the studio at the time. Now I'm putting a piece of flat spun nylon gossamer on this canvas, and this is because this lining will not have an interleaf. There's no rigid PET film going in between the two pieces of canvas. And the two pieces of canvas are of different weights, and I don't want to run the risk that the canvas textures interacting creates a pattern that then manifests itself on the front of the painting. So this matrix will help reduce that effect. Once the adhesive is dry, I can begin removing the excess gossamer and preparing the painting for its lining. And this brings up a perfect opportunity to talk about something that has absolutely nothing to do with what you are seeing right now, and that is Article 10. The conservation professional shall contribute to the evolution and growth of the profession, a field of study that encompasses the liberal arts and the natural sciences. This contribution may be made by such means as continuing development of personal skills and knowledge, sharing of information and experience with colleagues, adding to the profession's written body of knowledge, and providing and promoting educational opportunities in the field. Now that is a pretty broad menu from which a conservator can choose, and deliberately so. You see, I'm not a researcher, so I don't write many papers. In fact, the thought of having to write a paper, sends chills up my spine. But I do communicate with other conservators via Instagram, via email, phone call, or in person when possible. And we share tips and techniques. I have published the plans to build that hot table in the back online, given it away for free so that every conservator can build their own instead of being forced to buy one because they're really expensive. and beginning conservators may not have the resources to have this valuable piece of kit. In addition, I've helped other conservators build their own versions of the Clampinator, and any time that I can assist another conservator in a project, maybe it's one they've seen me execute on YouTube, I am more than happy to do so. Conversely, anytime I can borrow or steal from another conservator, or professional in any field, well, you bet I'll do it. And some of the best tips and techniques and tricks that I've picked up have come from people outside of the field of conservation, things that I've adapted to my own work. Now, with the painting successfully lined, and yes, I know I glossed over all of the steps during the lining process, but come on, frankly, you folks could probably recite back to me all of the steps that I did at this point. And if you're curious, there are plenty of other examples where I do go into depth about the lining process. But now I have to remove the facing, that beautiful washi-kozo that was adhered to the painting with fish gelatin to make sure that no paint was lost during the removal of the lining. And that's a pretty critical step, because you can imagine if I didn't do this and the paint was unstable and I lifted it off the table and half of the paint stayed on the table, well, that would be an unequivocal disaster. Now, the only problem with this washi-kozo is that when it gets wet, it kind of disintegrates. It turns into mush and it really melts, which is great for contouring around texture on the painting, but not so great when you're trying to remove it. That said, I've done this a few times, so I am well versed in how to remove the washi-kozo. Slow and steady, with a lot of patience and a lot of breaks. Now, going over the painting with a damp shop towel to remove any fish gelatin excess, some of the red paint is coming up, but I'm not concerned, and you'll find out why in a minute. Now, one of the best parts of any conservation process is cleaning the painting, getting all of that grime and old varnish off so that I can see what the artist saw when they completed the work. But it's also kind of nerve-wracking, particularly on a painting like this where it's been so poorly treated. Contact cement. Because I just don't know what I'm going to find. And I suspect, based on my visual examination, that there is going to be a lot of retouching. So removing all of this yellowed varnish, while it's really exciting to see the beauty of the colors underneath, it's also revealing just how much retouching there is. And, you know, that's kind of a bummer. Not only because it's a ton of work to retouch, but it means the painting's been really damaged and compromised. And I can put it back together, but I'd rather see that the painting was well treated and well cared for. Now, with the left half of her dress clean, we can see just how different she's going to look. And you can see a little test window that I made right above my hand on her skin. She is not jaundiced. She is actually a very healthy young bride. And as the varnish comes up, the uniform layer of yellow, well, it vanishes and reveals some really beautiful skin tones. And this natural resin varnish degrades over time. There's really nothing to be done. We know that, and now we have better materials. And as I finish up with her neck and move on to her face, well, it is the same story. That thin layer of slightly yellowed varnish is coming up and revealing a really radiant woman, somebody who was striving to look really beautiful on a really important day. And I'm happy to see that underneath it, she truly is. Now, I always love to leave the eyes for last whenever I'm cleaning a painting, and that's not only because they can be delicately painted and deserve a little bit more care and attention, but also because these are the eyes, and we focus on them. And there's a poetry in me finally removing all of the varnish and seeing her, and maybe her seeing me. Now, one thing you'll notice is that the removal of the varnish didn't take any of the retouching. And that's because the retouching was executed with a water-based medium, watercolor, gouache, tempera. And so I need to use, well, water to remove it. And as you can see, it comes up pretty easily. Now, this is a fairly common technique to do retouching in a medium that is different than varnish. That ensures that the varnish can be removed without the retouching medium coming off. But in this case, I'm finding lots of retouching. And you can see that even before I remove it, well, it wasn't good retouching. The color wasn't matched. The content wasn't matched. It was just kind of blurred over and disguised. And that's not a retouching technique. That's just sloppy. And here, again, in the eyes, you can see just how crude the retouching was. So I'm going to remove it because, of course, I can do better. And this is just bad. Now, luckily, it's water-based and it comes off really easily. I don't have to use any harsh chemicals or any aggressive scraping. And so for that reason, I'm not exactly angry, more just bummed that there's so much of it. And as I begin the process of filling in all of the losses, I will take this opportunity to segue into another article of the Code of Ethics that has nothing to do with what you're seeing right now. And that's article number 9. The conservation professional shall act with honesty and respect in all professional relationships, seek to ensure the rights and opportunities of all individuals in the profession, and recognize the specialized knowledge of others. And that one sounds pretty obvious, but I take it to mean don't be a jerk, but more so, don't close a gate or pull up a ladder. That is, if there's a person who needs mentorship, mentor them. If somebody asks a question, provide an answer. If you have a question, ask one. This is a field that depends on collegiality, cooperation, and a general goodwill towards others. For everything is built upon the work of somebody else. Nothing is new. If a new technique is developed, it has been informed by old techniques. If a new material is developed, it's on the back of somebody else's work. And understanding our roles in a continuum is absolutely critical. Nobody is better or more important than another person. And it's incumbent upon us not to treat others with disrespect or to make their lives, their work, more difficult. We should strive to be equal to each other, to share knowledge, to seek out experts when we need them, and to generally have a profound respect for those with whom we work. I know I'm sounding a little philosophical here, but it's a pretty good rule to live by. I think one that we should all consider in our daily lives. Now, you notice that I was using a cut-up sponge and a piece of felt there. And that's because I want to remove some of the excess and get a really smooth surface because this painting is really smooth. And long time ago, I saw a master plasterer use a piece of felt to smooth out a ceiling, to remove any signs of texture differences that would catch the light. And you know what I did? I stole it because it was a brilliant technique. And I thanked him for showing me. And now I use it often. So just another example. And now on to stretching. That is, if I can manage to not totally drop the stretcher. Well, the good news is that I have to reassemble it anyways. This is a fairly lightweight stretcher. It's not the best, but we're going to keep it anyways because it is adequate. But if I don't square it up, well, the painting will be crooked. And if I don't put some nails in the joints here to make sure that the stretcher stays square, as I'm stretching it, it will distort. And then I will either be faced with the choice of having a distorted painting and settling for that, which is unacceptable, or pulling out all the tacks and starting over, which is not the end of the world, but it is certainly avoidable, and so I want to avoid it. I'll start tacking in the middle of each side to make sure that the center of the painting is taut, and then I will work my way to the corners. This is a common technique for stretching a painting. There are many schools of thought on whether this or a linear approach is better, and every conservator gets to choose what works for them. Some people like starting at one corner and working across the painting. Some like starting in the middle. As long as the final result is acceptable, and delivers the highest of standards, then how one gets there, as long as it's ethical and appropriate, is up to them. And so I start from the middle and work to the corners. Others may vary. Now, I was going to save this one for the end as a nice poetic wrap-up, but I actually think it's best illustrated here as I'm working on the back and making it tidy. Article 1. The conservation professional shall strive to attain the highest possible standards in all aspects of conservation, including, but not limited to, preventative conservation, examination, documentation, treatment, research, and education. We've talked about a lot of those, but I want to talk about high standards. I take my time to make sure that the back of every painting looks as good as the front. And of course, it's totally not important, because nobody looks at the back. Everybody's looking at the front. But it matters to me, and it's just one way that I have high standards. I want the back to look just as good as the front. I want whomever does look at the back to be impressed, to recognize the work and care that went into the back looking that way, and see it as a reflection of the totality of work that went into this project. It's not to say that it's easy to make the front of the painting look good. It's actually easy to make the back of the painting look good. This is not all that difficult. But so often I find that people just ignore the back. They figure nobody's going to see it, so why bother? It takes time, time is money, it costs in materials, so who cares? Well, I care, and I think it is important, and that's why I do it. That's why I fold over the canvas and tack it, and that's why I put holes in the keys and bind them with fishing line. And finally, a once-over with some solvent to remove any traces of the fill-in medium, and we can get an idea of what she should look like. Well, if you can look past all of the losses. But I'll address those in the retouching step next. Now, the retouching process is exciting, but it is also one of extreme discipline. You see, I can only add paint where paint is missing. I'm not here to make the painting better. I'm here to respect it and help it, well, become itself. And in accord with best practices and the code of ethics, I use archival and reversible materials when executing retouching, so that in the future, if they ever need to be removed, the next conservator will have an easier time than I did. I'm going to reactivate the paint that's on my palette with a solvent, mix up a color, and then begin the process of making the damage disappear. And while I'm retouching, I'll take that opportunity to knock out 2 more articles from the Code of Ethics. Number 11, the conservation professional shall promote an awareness and understanding of conservation through open communication with allied professionals and the public. I'd like to think that these videos are bringing the world of conservation to a larger audience and not just giving everybody something to fall asleep to. Although, if that's your jam, go for it. I'm not here to judge. And as the painting slowly comes together and the damage disappears, well, we can start to see that this painting really is beautiful. She is beautiful. The technique is beautiful. Everything is beautiful. But it took a lot of work to get to this point, to get past all of the bad work and finally put her back together. There are many schools of thought on retouching. Some say you should try to reintegrate the image so that the damage is gone forever. Others say to just blend the damage away but still keep it upon close inspection. Those decisions are made by the conservator and the client. And what's right for one conservator and one client and one painting may not be for another. But that's why we get to make individualized decisions based on what's best for all parties involved. And of course, I leave the eyes for last because it's a real treat to work on the part of the painting that everybody gravitates to right off the bat. And these eyes were damaged, and so working on them will really complete this painting. And to complete the Code of Ethics, actually, there's one more, but this is the last one, number 13. Each conservation professional has an obligation to promote understanding of and adherence to this Code of Ethics. Well, tell me this much. Did you even know that there was a Code of Ethics at the beginning of this video? No? Well, now you do. With the retouching complete, I can now move to varnishing this painting. Now, we saw the natural resin varnish deteriorate over time. It yellowed and became discolored, and that is a problem. Not only does it obfuscate the true colors of the painting, but it requires aggressive solvents to remove, and that can pose a risk to an otherwise vulnerable painting. And so, if we want to talk about Article number 8, the conservation professional shall recognize a responsibility for preventative conservation by endeavoring to limit damage or deterioration to cultural property, providing guidelines for continuing use and care, recommending appropriate environmental conditions for storage and exhibition, and encouraging proper procedures for handling, packing, and transport. A lot of that stuff is banal, but preventing future damage is one area where choosing a reversible, archival, synthetic, UV-stable varnish is absolutely critical, because it ensures that it can be removed very easily and that no harsh chemicals are needed, harsh chemicals that could damage the painting. And there it is. With the work all complete, we can see that all of that lifting paint that was so perilously attached to the canvas, well, it's now bonded back down. The texture is smooth. There are no distractions. We don't see the surface anymore. We see the image. And the image itself is clean and bright. The whites of her jewels are glittery. The beautiful skin tones, well, look healthy. And this bride looks as stunning as she did on the day that she said, "I do." And while I have no idea how her nuptial vows held up over the course of time, I can say that by adhering to the Code of Ethics and working hard to make sure that all of my work was in accord with that document, if asked, do I have the belief that my work will stand the test of time? Well, the answer is, I do.